using a famous poem by Shel Silverstein as a model. And the things that you're going to need for this activity will be a copy of the poem and the chart. And both of those were included in the email that the church sent out with a link to this video. And you'd also need a pencil. And the name of the poem that we're going to look at is called Hector the Collector. And we're going to use this poem to write a special poem, or to write a poem about our special things. Those things that some of us might even call our treasures. So, if you want to stop the video here and go get those materials, you can do that. And then when you come back, you can push the button and start it from this point. Or you may already have the materials ready. Okay. All right, let's read it together. Or you can just follow along. I'm going to read it all the way through without stopping. Hector the Collector by Shel Silverstein. Collected bits of string, collected dolls with broken heads, and rusty bells that would not ring, bent up nails and ice cream sticks, twist of wires, worn out tires, paper bags and broken bricks, old chipped vases, half shoelaces, Gatling guns that wouldn't shoot, leaky boats that wouldn't float, and stopped up horns that wouldn't toot, butter knives that had no handles, copper keys that fit no locks, rings that were too small for fingers, dried up leaves and patched up socks, worn out bells that had no buckles, electric trains that had no tracks, airplane models, broken bottles, three-legged chairs, and cups with cracks. Hector the Collector loved these things with all his soul, loved them more than shining diamonds, loved them more than glistening gold. Hector called to all the people, "Come and share my treasure trunk." And all the silly, sightless people came and looked and called it junk. Okay. It's meant to be a humorous poem like most of Shel Silverstein's poems. But it does make a good point. Sometimes the things that we think are treasures, other people may not see them that way, right? But it doesn't take away from how special they are to us. So what we're going to do is write a poem that celebrates those special things that we all collect or keep. And some of you have had things from since you were little that you don't use anymore, don't play with anymore, but you can't get rid of them. They're just too special. Okay, so for the writing activity, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the poem and look at how Shel Silverstein created this poem. What did he do that made it such a good poem? How did he help us to see those objects that he was listing? And how did he make the poem sound so good? Okay, so we're going to look at the poem again. We're not going to go all the way through it, but I'm going to go point out certain lines in the poem. And I want you to underline some things as we're doing this. I want you to underline the describing phrases that Shel Silverstein uses to describe Hector's objects so that we can see them in our minds. Okay, let's look at line 3. It says, "And rusty bells that would not ring." Now, rusty gives us a picture of the bell, right? It's already begun to get rust on the outside of it, and maybe that little part in the middle that is missing, the part that makes it ring when you shake it. The next line says, "Bent up nails." So we can see nails in our mind, right, that are bent. And what kind of sticks does he collect? Ice cream sticks. What kind of vases? Old chipped vases. And leaky boats that wouldn't float. Now, he doesn't tell us why they won't float, but in our own minds, we can picture maybe a boat with a hole in it, right? That won't float anymore. And he has rings that were too small for fingers. So they've got to be really, really small, right? Okay. Dried up leaves, patched up socks. All those kinds of phrases help us to see the objects, and we don't even need to have a picture alongside it. So that's what you'll want to do when you write about your objects. You'll want to think of ways to describe them to help somebody picture them in their head. Okay, so that's one thing he does, is use great describing phrases. The other thing we want to look at is, how does he make it sound so good? Now he does have rhyme, and you can try to have some rhyme in your poem. Every line in this poem doesn't rhyme. And if you want to use rhyme, there is something called the rhyming dictionary online that you can look up and maybe put in a word that you're thinking about using and see if you can find a rhyme for that word. And that can help you to put in, if you want to add some rhyme to your poem, but you don't have to, right? Okay, the other thing that he does is something called alliteration. He puts words on the same line that begin with the same sound. For instance, let's look at, here we go, twist of wires and worn out tires. The "w" sound is repeated right there in those two words that are close together. There are lots of others. Here's another one. Copper keys that fit no locks. Copper and keys don't start with the same letter, but they have that same k sound. And putting them together like that gives those words a musical quality when they're read out loud. And there are lots of other examples. One of my favorites is glistening gold. He could have said shining gold, right? But he chose the word glistening because it has that same "g" sound at the beginning of it, so that it would sound better when it's read out loud. And still give us the same good picture of gold that shines brightly. Okay, so that's something else that he uses, alliteration and rhyme. And that's something that you can try to use in your own poem. Okay, the last thing we want to look at is how is the poem put together? And you may decide to use this same pattern when you're writing your own. Okay, so this time, let's go back and look at the beginning of the poem and see how he begins the poem by saying collected bits of string and collected dolls with broken heads. You might want to circle the words collected because he does that repetition there to help reinforce or emphasize, right, that this is a poem about someone's collection. Okay, and this is something that Hector does. It's a verb, right? Collected. All right. Then the next 16 lines after he begins this poem this way are a list of Hector's objects he collects and all the describing words for those objects. In fact, this is what this is called. This is called a list poem, where a writer uses a list of things that he or she thinks goes together and puts them together to just make a poem. And that's something it's one of the easiest poems to try to follow. It's an easy pattern to try to follow. So for 16 lines, he lists the objects and describes them. Then the poem switches over, and it begins with Hector the Collector. Okay, we're through listing his items. Now we're going to begin with the second part of the poem. It begins with Hector the Collector, and that's where you'd want to personalize this by putting your name there, right? Mine would say Joyce the Collector. Then the next 3 lines do that same thing again that he did at the beginning. Repeat the word loved. You can circle those. Circle the word loved. And he does that in 3 lines to emphasize how much Hector loved these things. And the next thing, the last part of it, the last 4 lines, that's where Hector calls the people over and he wants them, tells them to come look at his treasures. And they don't see it the same way as he does, right? They call it junk. Okay, so that's how the poem is put together. 2 lines that begin it by giving us the word collected, 16 lines with the items and their description, and then a switch over to telling us how much Hector loves his items or how much he loves his things, and then what happens when he tries to show those things to others. So that's a pattern that you can follow. Now, you don't have to follow it exactly. It's just like with a box of Legos, where if you get a box of Legos, you can make what's pictured on that box, or you can use those pieces and put them together and make something totally new, something that's your idea. So that's what we do with poem models. We use as much of it as we want, and then we add in what makes it our own unique piece of poetry. All right, now, so the first thing you want to do is gather yours. So that's how we've looked at the poem now. We've examined it, and that's our model. So what do you do to start writing your own poem? You gather your things that are special to you. I have picked up here a little stuffed animal that was given to me by one of my students many years ago. And it has a little note on the bottom of it that she wrote. And I have held on to this for a long time, and I'll never get rid of it. It really means a lot to me to think that she gave me this because there were Garfield posters all over my room, and she thought I needed an Odie to go along with those posters. And then I also have these little birds. They're beautiful. They're called bluebirds of happiness, mother bird and a baby bird. And I gave these to a very special lady, my son's grandmother. And when she passed away, they were given back to me. And I hold on to them because they remind me of how much I loved her and how much she loved me and loved us and loved my son. So these are some of my special objects. And that's what the first thing you want to do is gather your special things. Then you want to pick them up and think about, how can I describe this? What words or phrases would I use to describe my object? And that's where the chart comes in. It's a 2-column chart. In the first column, you'll list the objects that you've picked out as special. And then in the second column, beside those objects, you'll put in describing words or phrases that could help somebody picture it in their mind. Like, for instance, I might say a puffy yellow doll with a long red tongue. And that might be the way I would describe this object. And I could use bright blue birds made from see-through glass. And I would put that on my chart. And then when I got ready to write my poem, I would have some words or phrases there that I could pull from to help me keep writing. So that's what the chart's for, to help you write down, list your items, and then list describing words. Then, after you've gathered your objects, you've created your chart, then you can look back at the poem and see how do you want to set your poem up? Do you want to follow that model, or do you want to change it up? And then you start writing. And once you get it written, and you look over it, and you tweak it and get it just like you want it, then you share it. You can share it with the church by sending it to us in an email, but for sure share it with your family, because they will enjoy listening to you describe those special things and talk about those special things.